Pettitt, and today we are talking about chapter 26, trade. So I'm not going to lie. I do not believe I have dedicated more than 30 milliseconds of my entire life thinking about trade prior to reading this article. Not at all. So my friend Cynthia, hi Cynthia, was stupid enough to agree to also read this chapter with me. I'd like to point out Cynthia is smart as hell and also has not spent a ton of time thinking about trade. So the whole point of this project is to demystify what does this big giant book collection of essays say about departments and agencies that I probably have some kind of civic duty to understand and truly do not understand. And that's what we're going to do with trade. This particular one is actually two articles that disagree with each other smushed together. Some of the names you might also be kind of interested in because we have Kent Lasserman, sorry, who is making the case for free trade. And then we have our friend from the news, Peter Navarro, who is making the case for fair trade. What is the difference between free trade and fair trade? After reading the chapter multiple times, doing a bunch of research, and also looking at Stop the Coup 2025 summary, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, still unclear. I don't really know what the difference between fair trade or free trade is, but we read the chapter. High five. Okay. So Cynthia, just to start, is there anything burning a hole in your pocket that you need to get off your chest right away about this collection of essays that do not cross-reference each other, nor did either author read the other article like in a high school debate you would read and then do a counter? It's really just two random things written stapled together.
Absolutely disjointed. So I want to jump off there first. One being for fair trade, one being for free trade. Their recommendations are entirely different. And it feels like reading a really old set of arguments about we should be laissez-faire, let's repeal everything. The free trade thing, let's let the market regulate itself. And then the other, oh no, let's be very interventionist, fair trade, let's do it that way. So these are they're old classic economic arguments that Navarro and Lassman are making here. And I think it's notable that if you do one, you can't do the other. So it's not like a policy. There is no kind of coherent policy that comes out of this set of disjointed arguments.
Well, that is a true statement. And I would say, Cynthia, what you just said was more coherent than anything I read. So if you are procrastinating putting your dishes away, I would hit rewind and just listen to what she said again, because I don't even know that I could repeat it, but it was way more coherent. Okay, let's go. Are we ready?
We're ready.
Back up. Let's talk about what we're talking about. All right. Here are my notes. First off, we're going to start with a theme that has been throughout Project 2025, and that is personnel is policy. So I'm a consultant that works with organizations. I'm going to say, okay, sure, meaning that the people who you employ often should, modal verb, reflect the values or the priorities of that business and what that business or organization does would be its function or its policies. I'm trying to be charitable here. Otherwise, what are you saying? You're saying personnel is policy, I believe, is the quick bumper sticker way of saying nonpartisan civil servants who are loyal to the president's agenda, and that the policy is set by the president's agenda. And for the record, we mean only a conservative president's policy agenda. Nonpartisan cannot be loyal to a president's agenda by definition, but we are working with alternative facts. So civil servants are the personnel, and who they are is the policy. If we are talking about like sweeping deregulation, and there's a lot of like conspiracy theories about very liberal progressive people burrowing their way into the federal government as lifetime civil servants who are generally nonpartisan. We're fine with the burrowing if they are conservative agenda supporters. We want them, but we need to uproot those that are not aligned with the conservative agenda. I think that's the personnel as policy trope.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thoughts?
Well, yeah, I struggled with that argument. That makes a lot of
As
sense.
most people who apply to logic will.
Yeah, yeah. But what you said makes a lot of sense as the argument. And of course, it's Banana Town because career folks in any of these agencies are gonna be the only ones who actually understand, process the institution's history, just
Context.
context. Oh, we tried that and here it had disastrous unintended consequences, those kinds of things, as supposedly, non-ideologues, they're the only ones that are going to be able to actually make sure that these things function through the ages. And so this personnel is policy thing lies against everything I understand as a sociologist about how you keep institutions going over time. Because if somebody gets hit by a bus, you gotta have things rolling forward and
Yep.
others that can carry it. So that strikes me as bananas, but it also is clearly the, yes, absolute
Baseline.
loyalty to the conservative policy, whatever it is, which again,
Agenda.
in this case is the two pieces don't fit. You can't do both at the same time.
Right. There's so much of that through the entire document that I really think that summarizes everything we're talking about. Now we're just talking through the metaphorical idiom application of trade. All right. I'm going to attempt to read my notes. Some of this didn't make sense when I wrote it down, and you are smarter than me. So if it makes sense to you, feel free to weigh in. Otherwise, we're just going to kind of nod at each other, I think.
Great.
That's a big plan. To be clear, the key points of this chapter. Transfer power from making trade agreements from Congress to the president.
Oh boy, yes, that was a big one, wasn't it? That's
right. The president should be making trade agreements. Now, for the record, we were talking yesterday about like Boeing and the Import-Export Bank. Major companies make trade agreements all the time. Legislating trade agreements, I could see how that would be kind of odd, but I also see how legislating regulations on trade agreements might be important. But if we are centralizing this decision power to the president, that's the helm of the agenda to which all civil servants are loyal. So I'm going to give it at least efficient, wackadoodle, but efficient, and we're prioritizing that. All right, number 2, ensure that personnel, which are policy, are dedicated to carrying out the president's vision. So I think that's kind of the personnel's policy thing. It's about the president's vision, loyalty, doesn't matter, nothing else. What you mentioned, which I think is called like succession and long-term planning, perhaps it is a crossover that if we were to talk about succession and long-term planning of multiple conservative presidents, then maybe it would be more important to think about the context of having those personnel roll over. Unless we really are just talking about an oligarchy and they work for forever, but that's not mentioned in the chapter, but it is Peter Navarro. Okay. Number 3, recognize the threat of China. China
Yeah.
shows up in every single chapter, everywhere, all the time. Evil, awful, bad. The
Mm-hmm.
current trade deficits and potential military actions are related to the threat of China inside the chapter about trade, which does talk about like non-reciprocal tariff regimes, forcing other countries to lower US tariffs or non-tariff barriers. There's a lot of like combat weaponization of this finance stuff that I don't know anything about that I'm assuming this is kind of related to, which is why it makes sense, I think, to some degree that Trump's like, oh, I love tariffs. Not necessarily how math works with tariffs, but the tariffs is a weapon. It's something that can be used in negotiations with trade agreements, treaties, or those pointless global organizations like NATO, UN. Make sure they're carrying their own weight.
Mm-hmm.
Last but not least is encouraging cultural connections to draw Chinese youth towards Western ideas. A couple of times in the book, it talks about how Ronald Reagan, not that they're saying anything bad about Ronald Reagan, but Ronald Reagan was not the only weapon used to end the Cold War, but blue jeans and rock and roll are
Mm-hmm.
also weapons of ending the Cold War. And so if we can lure Chinese youth to Western ideas, that needs to be encouraged, and these cultural connections need to be understood, because that is something that we can use to bolster the US's domination as a MFN, a most favored nation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, end of speech. What did I just, what are we talking about? Any
Well,
thoughts?
let me just add a little note here about with the central focus on China, both Navarro and Lastman are deeply focused on China. One might suggest obsessed, but very focused on recognizing the threat of China,
Mhm.
and that, if both of them are focused on, if China becomes the global economic power that America is, then this is, disastrous, and we have to maintain our dominance and those kinds of things. So I would just like to note, Peter Navarro, I think it is, when he writes about China, says communist China every single time.
Yep.
In his little part of the chapter, I was like,
Yep.
oh, that's interesting. Communist China and CCP is how he represents that. And, they both really agree, though they have these different approaches. They really believe that this focus on China is central to the US's national security, to American identity, that China is seeking to undercut the US with cheap goods, dominate the market, and become the global superpower. And so it's all very masculine language about all of this. And the
Mhm.
other Ken, if you will, I don't know if you watch Barbie, the film Barbie, but the other Ken that these Kens are obsessed with is China.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I think that is, again, very clear and
Mhm.
very appreciative, because I don't know that I really understood what is happening, right? So again, it keeps making me think, which is so funny, because if you watch the video about the Export Import Bank, we are like, what? I don't know. But it keeps making me think about this. But the two articles, again, abolishing it or keeping it,
Mhm.
that don't
Mhm.
cross-reference each other at all. But
Mhm.
what was interesting is about the main reason to keep it was that, and I like your Barbie kin metaphor, the main reason to keep it was that it's the tool all the other kins play with. And so if we don't have it, we can't play with the other kins. And the main reason to get rid of it is like fraud, waste, whatever. It's inefficient and businesses can negotiate their own deals and already are. At one point, it didn't even have enough members, so it didn't have quorum, so it couldn't meet for a year and no one noticed. And positions the US to be paying for the standard of living for people around the globe. What? So the two articles totally have different arguments. They do not support one another and bonkers bill in both places. So then when I think of this one, if trade is a given that we're supposed to be doing this. And part of the reason we're supposed to be doing this is the business opportunity prioritization, right? So I'm curious if the new Trump administration goes forward with this external revenue service. Internal revenue service exists. External revenue service. Is that setting up the US to be run like a giant corporation that should be turning a profit? Let's pretend yes. So then I'm going to extrapolate just for funsies. Milton Friedman would say that anybody who pays federal taxes, state taxes, would then be the shareholders. So then in some weird way, that is returning the country's priority to the individual voice. I bet that's not what they mean.
Probably not.
Certainly not everybody's voice.
Not everybody. That's
right.
for dang sure. Clear value on though there's language in there about, you know, the WTO is exploiting American farmers and things like this. I don't believe for a second the concern is with farmers. It seems to be with at the moment tech billionaires. Is what I'm saying.
For the record, there are billionaires involved in farming and ranching.
Sure.
They just haven't been determined as too big to fail yet. But and China, if we want to be specific, owns almost 400,000 acres of land in the United States that could be used for farming or ranching or solar panel or wind. We don't know what they're going to do with it, but we didn't have a problem with that. Okay, here's another little favorite gem from the chapter.
Yep.
Trade deficits matter.
Yeah. That could be a hashtag.
It is. I'm going to go on a little pinko commie liberal vacation for just a second. So Cynthia, pull me back in when it's getting too crazy.
Okay.
Are you familiar with the hashtag Black Lives Matter?
I am.
Fascinating. So what's interesting about Black Lives Matter is that technically speaking, all lives matter. But the response to Black Lives Matter being all lives matter sucks because we're trying to highlight this one particular kind of life that seems to be experiencing something that appears that it doesn't matter as much, right? That's why we're saying Black Lives Matter. So sure, all lives matter, but that's one of those inequitable things that we don't like to focus on. To tell me that trade deficits matter, a 3-word sentence, trade deficits matter. To say that, my immediate response was, well, living beyond your means, probably all of them matter, right? Yes, but Peter Navarro, we're focusing on trade deficits. Okay, so then I immediately went to Black Lives Mattering inside of All Lives Mattering. So trade deficits mattering inside of all deficits mattering. Do you see what I did there? So I believe it's called parallel use of metaphor. Does that mean that they learned something from the Black Lives Matter movement?
Oh, wouldn't one wish?
Oh, come on. Let me have this one little thing. All right, that's how bad this writing is that my brain went there just to like save the English language.
I like that.
Thank you. We did not talk yet about border adjustment tax. I'm just going to say it because it's in my notes. I don't know what it means either. We did not yet talk about dual use technology.
Mm,
Also a thing. That's a thing.
mhm.
Um, China and India are greater than Thailand, Taiwan, Vietnam, and the EU generally. I'm assuming this is actually their barriers to tariffs, right? That China and India are the worst. Thailand, Taiwan, and Vietnam and the EU collectively are the next group. And then Malaysia and Japan are the next group.
Mhm.
Of what? Uncertain, not clear, but
Mhm.
noted. Thank you for your clarity. Okay, then we get into the Trans-Pacific Partnership,
Mhm.
which is suggested. This is the fair trade, I believe. Isn't that the second one? The first one. Wait, hold on. Let me get it right. Fair trade is Peter. Now we're at free trade. We're moving into the second half. Yeah. So Trans-Pacific Partnership is between Australia, Brunei. Is that even how you say that? I don't even know how you say
It
that.
is. It sure is. Uh-huh.
Okay, great. Thanks. I guessed. I blame Texas. Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, Vietnam, and the US. That is sometimes referred to as the TPP.
Yeah. Yeah. It's how the people
Um,
call it. Mhm.
we like that. We like that. Okay.
Mhm.
Growth within the GDP or economic growth should be measured related to trade. Is what we're looking for is consumption, government spending, business investment, not a net exports. That is a new way of determining GDP. So if we get rid of trade, flip it to fair trade instead of free trade, we wouldn't have a clear marker of GDP.
And I did get lost in there for a second.
I'm still lost in there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's another chapter that I'm forgetting which one, but said the GDP is being measured by employment rates, which can be problematic because people can have more than one job. But this definition is encouraging it to be on consumption, government spending, business investment, and net exports. So here's my question.
Yeah.
We get rid of federal regulations entirely,
Yeah.
and we put this to local municipalities or states.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to add up consumption, government spending, business investment, and net exports without adding all that information into, like, I don't know, a centralized location? And are they all going to ask the same questions?
Absolutely not. There's no way they could, right? Because if they, if you're going to the municipalities and all these different things, you wouldn't be able to have something comparable, right?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay. Next piece.
Mm-hmm.
Indo-Pacific trade
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
should be in connection with, I think, climate and labor policies. And the Department of Commerce, Defense, and State should be more in charge of trade. So we can get rid of it, but put it over here. And that's the connection to GDP is commerce, and the connection to kind of this non-reciprocal tariff regime
Mm-hmm.
forcing other countries to lower US tariffs, negotiation, non-tariff barrier thing is the connection to the Department of State and Department of Defense. We're getting rid of the EPA, obviously. So climate and we're not really tracking labor policies because we're not regulating
Mm-hmm.
labor regulations. Those are going to go down to the local municipalities,
Mm-hmm.
but are mentioned. So I'm mentioning
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And may I say something that strikes me about that is get rid
them. I
of
need a nap. Is that what you're going to say?
also, yeah, yes, me. I think naps are needed all around after having read this and discussing. One, EPA, labor, these are organizations that have values about, you can do stuff in business, but you can't damage the environment / create toxic conditions for communities, la, la, la. The other,
We're getting rid of those though.
yeah. Labor, I mean, yes, you can have people work for you, but you can't exploit them, kill them with the conditions, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, no. We're getting rid of those too.
Yeah.
OSHA, EPA, gone.
And it strikes me in saying lift, we don't need that, we don't need that. It's this absolutely amoral, free of morals, kind of, we will pursue trade, we need economic and military dominance, we're obsessed with China, we have to focus on them. It's like an at all, by any means necessary kind of argument that is being made there, right?
Yeah. Oddly, Cynthia, I know you were like, I'm not prepared for this. I don't know what to say. I really appreciate you drawing these connections because it's actually kind of making sense to me a little bit more. Because oddly, what are we thinking about? What are we prioritizing is bringing up what is mentioned as the Ricardian trade model, which, hello, Google. This was before the actual fall of net neutrality when I did this research. And I'm going to read. What is the Ricardian model of trade? Are you ready? Everyone, grab a pen. Take notes. Don't take notes. The Ricardian model of trade is an economic theory that explains international trade patterns based on the concept of comparative advantage, where countries specialize in producing goods that can produce relatively more efficiently compared to other countries. Efficiency, key. Even if they could produce everything more efficiently overall, leading to mutual benefits from trade by specializing and exchanging goods. This model primarily attributes the differences in efficiency to variations in labor productivity due to different technologies across countries. Oh, there's more. The key points about the Ricardian model. They focus on comparative advantage, labor as the only factor of production. I run a business, so I just want to point out there's a couple other variables between like time, money, energy. Okay, differences in technology, constant returns to scale, and two country, two good model. What is that one, just for fun? The most basic explanations of the Ricardian model, obviously, use a simplified scenario with only two countries producing two different goods.
Okay.
So it's not, we're talking like not even apples and oranges. We're talking like apples and tractors. Except we're not talking about apples because we didn't even mention fruit when we were actually talking about the USDA. Okay, example. Imagine country A, let's call it Afghanistan, is more efficient at producing both wine and cloth than country B, let's say Brazil. But country A, Afghanistan, has a significantly larger advantage in producing wine compared to cloth. According to the Ricardian model, Afghanistan should specialize in producing wine and export it to country B, Brazil, while Brazil should specialize in producing cloth and export it to Afghanistan, even though Afghanistan could produce both goods more efficiently. That to me sounds like dictating business, which is kind of counter to focusing on Milton Friedman and the free market economy. Here are the criticisms of the Ricardian model. Oversimplified assumptions. The model is often criticized for its simplistic assumptions, such as considering only labor as a factor of production and ignoring other factors like capital and land. It also neglects transportation costs. The model does not account for the costs of transporting goods between countries, which can affect trade patterns. Brazil is not located near Afghanistan. Limited applicability to real world situations, like Afghanistan doesn't produce wine. I'm just kidding. While useful as a theoretical framework, the Ricardian model may not fully capture the complexities of real world trade with multiple goods, factors of production, and other economic considerations. But that is the model that we are using because why the hell not? Thoughts?
Well, the overly simplistic thing without considering all these other factors, it seems to me it applies overall. I would, I'm sure to other chapters as well, but this idea of applying that to trade, there are so many other complexities. There are so many other moral questions. There are so many other unintended consequences. There are so many other implications of these things that, to me, are not put into consideration here. And so it makes it seem really straightforward. We're gonna, we're gonna X, we're gonna, get out of the WTO because we don't like the non-reciprocal trade agreements, whatever it is, we're going to repeal these acts, whatever the suggestion is. It doesn't take into consideration all these other impacts. And to me, the impacts are on real human lives very often.
Yeah, we don't care about those though, human
Right,
lives.
right,
What
right.
it makes me think of, and I want to kind of transition and be respectful of time, to what on earth are we supposed to do as regular people at our dining room tables?
Yeah.
So, partially this project has been pointing out hypocritical thinking, or at least the lack of logical thinking. So here goes. I did not know this, but when the hurricane hit Puerto Rico during COVID,
Yep.
one of the immediate impacts that I heard about, right? I'm sure there were thousands, but one of them that showed up in my universe was the lack of saline bag inventory because saline bags are mostly produced. Puerto Rico produces more of them than anybody else ever anywhere somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
When we had supply issues of like toilet paper, and then there was a supply issue around baby formula, which is mentioned specifically as an example.
Mm-hmm.
If we reduce countries down to you produce saline bags, but over here you produce baby formula, that's like your one job. Do it right. There is an efficiency there that is only disrupted by surprise.
Say
And
more.
the surprise could be a hurricane or a global pandemic.
Right, right, right,
Or
right.
wouldn't it be great if every country had its one thing it was supposed to do and everybody in that country loved that doing that one thing and then we all collaborated together. What is also fascinating is there's something in there that feels very socialist, which I'm pretty sure that they're not aware of.
Mm-hmm. I think they would say thumbs down on that. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're focusing on free market economy and business innovations,
Mm-hmm.
which means I actually could provide an extra space for myself and my business innovations if I produced saline as a byproduct of the baby formula that I also produce.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Your economics are not economicing.
They're really not. And they're, again, old models, it's old arguments. And it really is, as Make America Great Again is like, let's take us back decades to centuries. These arguments strike me in a really similar way.
Yeah, let's take the United States. What would our one product be? Because we're really big. We have a lot of climate, we have a lot of land, we have a lot of different topography. I grew up in Texas, And there's a pretty big argument of whether or not Texas is a beef state or a chicken state.
Mm, mm,
I went to college in Arkansas,
mm-hmm,
and there's a pretty big argument of whether it is a chicken state or a water state because most of
mm,
the state's on top of an aquifer,
mm.
but we can only pick one.
Wow. Texas is quite large, is my understanding.
Also a true story. That
Mm-hmm,
is true.
mm-hmm,
Also, no one in my family has raised cattle.
mm, mm,
Nope, managed somehow to scrape a living that did not involve ranching.
mm-hmm,
Okay, here's another thing to think about when you are doing your own homework. What is your state producing? What
mm-hmm,
is it known for? What would its one thing be? And chances are you're going to come up with at least a dozen things. But like know what your dozen things would be because those are your monopoly board pieces in the game of trade, which
mm-hmm,
could be even eventually trading amongst states. So then that's something to think about. Also, when all these names of all these other appointments and nominees are rolling around, National Security, Council of Economic Advisors,
mm-hmm,
National Economic Council, Secretary of Defense, and the Secretary of Commerce are
mm-hmm,
all going to be directly related to the goods that are produced and consumed within your local municipality, your county, and your state. So maybe find out who those people are, who they're going
mm-hmm.
to end up being, and what is the equivalent on your state and local county, local municipality level. Um, I don't know. Do you happen to do one of those jobs? Because this could also impact your job bits. And if
Mhm.
we're not tracking employment anymore for growth and national GDP, but actually the profitability of local businesses without comparing them across a network of other dynamics across states, that might be something for you to pay attention to.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think we need a nap.
I think we need a nap. There's just so much that we had to comb through.
I know. But you know what? I'm feeling slightly smarter, tireder, but slightly smarter because Cynthia, you helped me pull this stuff out of my very convoluted brain, and I really appreciate it. Do you have any parting words for the person procrastinating something who is still watching this video?
Well, right. Hello, friend. What I would like to say to them is, when I was a sociology professor looking at social problems, I would always say, when you look at people's recommended solutions, you can tell what they think the root cause is of something, right? And so because if you think that the cause of evil in the country is
Women,
women,
liberals, gay
women,
people, trans
liberals,
people.
people who, yes, gender identity and expression, blah, blah, blah. That's where you're going to go with your policy. And so we can tell from these two authors, they have different root causes, and you can't be both of those things. And so I don't feel like I know anything more about what is intended from reading these two chapters. I'm sorry to tell you.
I don't think you need to apologize. I think you are a very educated, objective, smart reader who lives in the United States and doesn't get it either.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm, mhm,
that's what we got to say. Welcome to
mhm.
trade.
Wow. Trade,
Uh-huh.
everyone.
Trade.
Mhm.
On that note, I'm going to say thank you very much again, Cynthia, and please go take a nap.
Thank you so much. I wish you good napping as well, my friend.
Bye.